Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly wrap-up where I tell you about what I finished reading in the past week. It's a really rainy Sunday here. We had a massive thunderstorm come through and my allergies have gone nuts predictably, and I have a sinus headache coming and going. Also, I've read a bunch of books that are parts of series and not always so much you can say about those without spoiling previous books. The Girl Who Raced Fairyland All the Way Home by Catherynne and Valente. This is the fifth and final book in the Fairyland series about a young girl named September who gets whisked away to Fairyland by the green wind, wherein she meets many friends, breaks all the rules, and topples rulers, people of authority, and then in this book she has accidentally become the Queen of Fairyland. Because there are so many other people who claim the throne of Fairyland, it's decided that there's going to be a race between her and all of the previous rulers and people who claim the throne. Whoever finds the heart of Fairyland first will be the winner. And September is kind of stuck because she's not really sure if she wants to win or not. She ended up as queen accidentally and doesn't really want to remain queen. She's kind of homesick. She wants to go home to her mother and her father, but at the same time, she doesn't want to lose either. So I really liked this conclusion. It was a good story. I can't help but think that it was a little bit too long though. Like the entire cast comes back in this book, and it's not like physically longer than many of the other books in the series. It's just over 300 pages, but during the episodes of the race, and whenever two competitors in the race meet, they have to duel, and so there are these duels, and after like the second one of those, I got the point. So I feel like some of that could have been trimmed away. On the other hand, it's great to see all of the characters and so many of the places come back, even in brief cameos, and a lot of little questions tied up with things like Hawthorne's story, for example. He's the boy from the fourth book. So yeah, it was really good, and I have to give this series high props for the storytelling. You know, it takes the children go to Fairyland story and does something new with it, but also without breaking too many of the traditional expectations, I guess. And also the language. If you've ever read Catherynne and Valente's work, you know that her style is very distinct. It is ornate. It is like the Baroque style. It has all of the gilded edges and words and wordplay and everything. It's very dense in some ways. And that has worked for me in most of Valente's books, but I think it excels in the Fairyland books. And I love the idea of kids reading this series. You know, it's kind of middle grade, and basically what a joy that might instill in children with language, with learning vocabulary and such. And when adults read it, like parents, I feel there's kind of like a nudge and a wink in there for the adults too, because it is intelligent even for older, more experienced readers. So all around, I feel like Valente hit all the marks with this series, and the final book was pretty darn good. Then I read books 2 and 3 in the Chronicles of St Mary's series by Jodi. The second book is A Symphony of Echoes, and the third is A Second Chance. This series is, as I keep saying, just fun for me. I think it is highly enjoyable madcap adventures with some darker moments as we get further into the series, but it has the sense of humor that I like. The characters are awesome and funny, and some of them don't get along and some of them get along very well, and I love reading it. But I don't think it is super high literature, that's for sure. I also mentioned before that it reminded me of The Rise and Fall of Dio Dio, which is another time travel story, which is much more fantasy. This one I actually classify as science fiction. But I have noticed in this series that you have all these time traveling historians and not a single one of them is a linguist. And linguists and linguistics plays a pretty big part in Dio Dio, and I'm just like, that's missing from here. There's more to investigating history and actually going back to historical events than just making sure you're dressed okay and you stay in the background. You're going to places where you don't speak the language. If you can't speak the language, then I think you're kind of screwed. I think they kind of gloss over the language problems in this series a little bit, but I would notice that. So I guess A Symphony of Echoes is mostly about Jack the Ripper and then Ronan, the enemy of St. Mary's, coming back one last time, trying to destroy history in order to destroy St. Mary's, and they need to stop him. And in the third book, A Second Chance, the big event is that the historians and Max go back to Troy to witness the fall of Troy. None of these things go very well. Every time travel adventure seems to end in utter disaster in one way or another. Anyway, I loved them, and I'll be reading the next couple of books very soon. The last two books that I read this past week were both nonfiction. The first one I'll talk about was The End of Night, Searching for Natural Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light by Paul Bogart. This was a bit of a mixed bag, though I've been wanting to read this book for years. I first heard about it on Librarian Fan Mail's channel, which I don't think her channel exists anymore, so it was that long ago. Because as someone who was interested in astronomy when I was younger, and like my parents had a telescope and we went out to state parks to look at the sky and everything, I've been aware of the light pollution problem for most of my life. And this book is the author's search for the last remaining places where a truly dark night can be found in North America and Western Europe, but really specifically focused on the United States. And it's pretty depressing. Basically, true darkness doesn't exist anymore because of light pollution and because of the very terrible lighting practices that most places in the US have, most places in the world have. The reason this was a mixed bag for me is that while I found the individual subtopics to be very interesting, I don't think they were organized in a particularly good way. I didn't discern a real logical arrangement in this book. I also listened to it on audiobook, which means organization is even more important. The author is not an expert on any of these topics. This is not a real scientific work. It's a creative nonfiction writing professor who's interested in the topic, traveling around and interviewing experts. And so it's a lot of short quotes from some people and him going off on these more poetical descriptions of the night sky and the landscape and seeing the stars and everything. And I thought I was going to get something more scientific, honestly. So if you are interested in the idea of night and dark and light pollution and stuff, this is a really approachable book, and it's written well. But if you demand like scientific evidence and expert opinions and stuff, this is not going to be that. The other nonfiction book that I read and that I absolutely loved was A Kraken Creation by Jennifer Doudna and Samuel Sternberg. I'm gonna get super tongue-tied talking about this book. I thought it was so good and so important to read and to understand what this is. So A Kraken Creation is about CRISPR-Cas9, a tool that's very recently been discovered that allows for relatively quick, cheap, and accurate gene editing. This is the tool that science fiction writers have been imagining for decades that allows for things like designer babies and drastically modifying genomes and, you know, rewriting humanity and stuff like that. So the first half of this book, well, not the first half, the first part of it is about the discovery of CRISPR, explains how it works. So you have to really understand how CRISPR works and other methods that have been used before that were clunkier and more expensive to do gene editing, to really understand the power of CRISPR and why people are kind of scared about it, but also exhilarated by it. It is like the magic bullet type of thing. And then the remainder of the book, once you understand what CRISPR is tackling the questions, the issues of ethics and morality and laws worldwide about the use of CRISPR, because CRISPR, its use has exploded and has grown so quickly that it has globally outstripped any discussions about how it should actually be used, especially with the human genome. There are already scientists in like China who have been doing this, and it's really alarmed people like Doudna, who think that yes, this is great, but you have to understand the implications of it before you just start using it willy-nilly. There could be massive drawbacks to it. There could be unintended consequences, and because it's so new and not that much research has been done yet, we don't know. I thought this was all fascinating. The part describing how this was discovered was a riveting story. It's a tale of 21st century global science, a truly international team of people working remotely to so quickly discover CRISPR. And then the power of it is just astonishing. Sometimes you hear about that thing that's been discovered in your lifetime and you just go, that was a major thing. People will look back on this and be like, this is when things changed. That's how I'm feeling about CRISPR. And it's also because this is so recent and because Doudna is still working on bringing people to talk about this and to get laws passed and policy made and to get people educated so they can decide this stuff, so they can make guidelines. It's not settled yet. It's like the questions have been raised, but there are no answers yet. And I feel like this book is Doudna's call to action in many ways. So this is highly, highly recommended reading, and I think people, like the public in general, needs to know more about this. That is it for me this week, guys. I will talk to you again in my next video, whenever that may be. I don't know if I'll get any more filming done this weekend, but I'll be back eventually. And until then, bye.